guys, and welcome to a new video in this C++ tutorial. In this video we're going to talk about object-oriented programming and like what it is and what it can be used for, and also like why it is so important to use in modern programming. So first of all, we're going to talk about like what is object-oriented programming and some of the advantages there are with object-oriented programming compared to like just normal programming. So object-oriented programming is about like creating objects that contain both data and functions. So we can like create objects from classes in object-oriented programming that like contains data and functions that we can use on separate classes. So one of the advantages over like normal programming is that object-oriented programming is faster and easier to execute and develop, because like we're like dividing our program into like smaller like subclasses and stuff like that. So it provides like a more clear structure of the program, and we will get like a much better overview because we have like divided our program into different classes, and then we can use those classes together and stuff like that. So we get like some kind of like structure of the program. So it also like helps us not repeating code. So if we like write a class, then we can just like create a new instance or like a new object of that class, instead of we have to create like repeat the code or like copy paste our code and also like our variables and attributes and stuff like that. So it makes the code easier to maintain and modify and debug, and again it just like you get a better overview when you're using object-oriented programming. It also like makes it possible to create full reusable applications with less code and development time, because when you have created a class once, like it could be like a student or something like that, then you can reuse that and you can like move it from one program to another program when you have already created that class. So it's like really portable, and it's just like it's better because there's less code, and it also like makes the develop time much better and faster. So there are quite a lot of different kind of like advantages of object-oriented programming compared to just like using normal programming. So to give you guys an overview over like what is object-oriented programming, and we have like this circle down here, which is like the kind of the aspects that object-oriented programming contains. So when we have like object-oriented programming, we're talking about like classes, where we have like different kind of classes that we can like create objects of. So we can create an object or like an instance of a class, and then that class can contain some attributes, which will be like the data or variables for that class. And you can also have like some methods, which is like kind of like functions, like when we just like have normal programming. Then when we have functions in our classes, we call them methods. So we can also like call individual methods on our objects, and we have methods in classes. We also like have this encapsulation, where we hide everything that is not important to like the whole program or like the world, and then we can have some private attribute methods, and we can also like have some public ones, but we can like encapsulate the information that we don't want to like give the customer or something like that. So we can like encapsulate the data and the methods that we have inside of our classes. We're also going to in another video talk about like inheritance, where we can like have like classes that are inheriting from each other, so that you like using each other's like attributes and methods and stuff like that. So we can have like, for example, a person, and that person would have a name and an age and stuff like that, and then we can have like another class that is inheriting from the person class, and it could be like students and teachers and stuff like that, which also has names. But we're going to cover that in more details in later videos. We also have like this abstraction here, where we just like we put away all the unnecessary information that we don't like want the user to like interact with, because they're not important for the user. And we also have like polymorphism, which we're also going to cover in another video, where we can actually like override some different kind of functions. So let's say we want to calculate an area of different types of figures, then we can like kind of like overload it, where we can have like different kind of functions that does this. The same function can do different kind of things. So there's a lot of different kind of aspects in object-oriented programming. This was just to like give you an overview over it, and we're going to go a lot more in details about this, because it is really important in modern programming for using like object-oriented programming. So when we're talking about like object-oriented programming, we have these like classes that we create, and like the attributes and methods are basically like just variables and functions that belong to the class, which I talked about in the previous slide as well. And then we can create an object from the classes that we create. So we can have like multiple objects of one class, and we can have like other classes where we have objects for that class as well. So to like define and create a class in C++, we have this keyword here, class, and then we give it like a user-defined name here for a class. So this will be our class name. And then first of all, we need to give it like an access specifier where it can either be like private, public, or protected. So this is like in our encapsulation where we can have like these private methods and attributes that can't be accessed outside of the class itself. And then we can also like have this public where like then we can where we can access all the attributes and methods from everywhere in our program from that class. And then we have our data members, which is just like our variables that we want to use for that class. So that could be like a name and an ID and age. We're going to see examples of like how to create a class in C++ later in the video, and I'm going to show you like how to create functions as well, and specify this access specifier here. And then we can create the member functions and a constructor. So like a constructor is like a function that gets called every time we create an object, and it can take some parameters as well. So we're going to cover that as well. So one of the most important things is like questions is like why use object-oriented programming, because it's quite important to know, and it's also like very useful because like let's say we have a very huge application that we want to create, and we like want to divide our program into like smaller classes, or like just like so we don't have everything in like let's say like one piece of code, and then it just loses the overview if our application is like really big. So if you look at this example here with some like kind of like bank application where we can have like a bank here that has some customers and an account and ATMs for that bank, and for an account we can have like these classes here that are inheriting from the account class here. So and one example of an account could be like a saving account and a current account. And then we have like some transcripts, receipts, and ATM transactions and stuff like that. So like all these green blocks here are actually like classes that we create for this application here. And then all of the classes here can have different kind of like member data or like member variables and attributes here, which is like this plus sign here, and then in the middle block here. And then it has like the methods down here in the last, or like in the third block here. So for example, like an account here could have like a number and a balance as attributes, and then the functions for that account we need to like implement is that we should be able to like deposit some amount of money, and we also should be able to like withdraw an amount of money, and we also need to like be able to create transactions. And then this account here is somehow like known by the customer here. So like a customer can have an account, or like in this case you can have like 1 or 2 accounts. And then the customer here is like inside of one bank, so it knows like the bank class here should know like the customer class here, and then the customer class is connected to an account class. So this is like to give you a better overview, and also like when we're going to make bigger applications and like a lot bigger applications for like some practical use, then we're actually going to create this this class diagram here before we're going into like programming, because it just makes it easier to just like visualize it first, and then we have like all these classes here that we're going to implement. Then we can just like go in, create a new class, and then just give the class the attributes that it needs, and also like the method, we need to write the methods for that class as well. And then in the end that like connect all of those classes here, so we like end with our program in the end. So it is very useful, and it's used in many applications, and you should also like use it for also like smaller applications where you have like some different kind of things that can be divided into like classes. So we're not doing Sublime Text here, and I'm going to show you like some different kind of examples of how to create a class with some attributes to that class, and also like some methods that we can use. So first of all, we're just like starting with creating a header file. Like most often when we create a new class, we separate it into another file, so like our program gets we get a better overview over our program and divide it into smaller files. So like the only thing we have in our main file is like when we're creating the object and like connecting all of those classes together. So we're creating this header file here called student, because we're creating a student class in this case here, and we're including the necessary libraries for like creating this student class here. And then we use the keyword here, class, and then we give it the class name here, which is student in this case here. And then we talked about like this access specifier here, where the first here is public. So by default, when we're creating a class, like all the attributes and methods will be private unless we specify it as public. So in this case here, we want our our name for the student and the age for the student to be public, so that can be accessed like everywhere in our code where we have created our object of the student here. And then when we have a class, we also like when we create an object, we can have like a constructor that we can pass different parameters to. So first here we just have a default constructor here where it takes no parameters, so we can just like create a student with this default constructor here. But we can also have like this constructor here where we give it some parameters. So when we create a student, we want to create that student object with a name and an ID and an age. And then we can like set those parameters here to like the attributes of the class here. So like this name here will be equal to the name here that we pass to our object when we're creating it, and the same goes for like the ID and the age here in this case. We can also like have multiple constructors. We can also have like multiple constructors where we can have different amounts of like parameters, and we can also like have the same amount of parameters if we have like, for example, another data type here. So the first two parameters here are like the name and string, like the name and the ID as in the first constructor here. And then the third parameter here is a vector of like the grades for the student. So this will like be different from this constructor up here, and like C++ will automatically like find out which constructor to use when you pass different types of like data types to it. So we can also like create a new multiple like constructor here where we have just two parameters. So if we're initializing our object with only like two parameters, then it will use this constructor here. We can also have like a destructor, which is like a function or like a method that gets called when our object goes out of scope. And if we're using like pointers, we can use this to like delete the pointers and stuff like that when our object goes out of scope and it gets deleted. So the destructor gets called when the object is deleted. So in this case here, we just print out that the name or like the student has been deleted when we go out of scope. We also can have some public methods here. I just created some of the default like or the standard and simple public method here that can be accessed everywhere. So we're going to see some examples on like how we can use this in our main program as well later on. So the first function here is just like we have a function where we can get the student ID. So this ID here is a private member or like a private attribute. So we can't access this from our main function if we don't have like a get method to get that specific attribute from our class here, because it has private access here, so we can access it outside of the class itself. And we can also like set the student ID from the main function with this function here, and we just set like the ID to the parameter that we pass to this function, and the return up here we just return the ID to get the student ID. We can also like have a public method here, which is like this is like encapsulation where we, for example, we want to like get the average of the grades of that student here, and we can just have a function that calculates the grades here, and then it just like returns the grades. So this is like for some like users viewed, like this is a pretty good function here, and this function should be public because this is like didn't need to get accessed outside of the class here, where like this calculate grades average here is a private method and can't be accessed like outside of the class. So we go down here to like the private things inside of this class here, and again, like if we don't specify anything in the start, like everything will be private when we're talking about classes. So we have like a private attribute here, which is the ID, and we also have like the average grade here as private. And then we have these grades here, the vector of grades for the student, which can only be accessed by this get grades average function here, which calculates like the average of the grades. So the last function here is just like to calculate the average age. So first of all, we need the size, like a number of grades the student has. So we just take the size of the grades, and then we have a sum, and then we just go through all the grades and sum them together, and then we can the average grade will be the sum divided by the numbers of grades. And then we just set this attribute here, which is this public attribute up here. So this grade average here will now be, when we call this function, it will now be updated as this grade average here. And then we can call the function up here and then just return the private attribute here. So this is how we can get the average grade for a student outside of the class by calling this function here. So let's go into we have now created our class here with the student with some different kind of constructors and like attributes, and also like some functions which are both like public and private. So let's go into main program here and try to like access and create objects of that student and see like how it works in a main function here. So first of all, we're just going to like, we need to first include the header file here where we created the class in. And then we have like a name here of our first student, which is just in this case the coding library. And then we create an object here, an object here, which is student keyword here, which is the class that we want to create an object of. And then we give it the name here of the object, and in this case we just call it student1. We pass the name parameter here, and we pass an ID and an age. And then we can see if we print out the ID here, we could access the ID, and this ID here is a private attribute of the class, so we couldn't access it with just like, if we just do like something like ID here. We could have done this if it was a public attribute, but we can't do this because we can't access it when it's private. So we need to have this public method here that can actually like return the student ID from that class. So if we hit Control B here, it will like print out the ID here, and when all of these like objects here goes out of scope, we know that it will call the destructor, and we can see that that all the students here that we create later on gets destroyed when we go out of this main function. So another example here is that we can actually like create this another student here where we have this grade here, just to like show you that we can pass like the same amount of parameters but with different data types. So in this case here we're using like the second constructor here, which takes a name and a student ID and then a vector of grades. So in the first example here, we can just see like if we want to get the grades average, we need to like call this get grades average function, and then this function here it calls the calculate grades average function, and then it just like returns that attribute and it gets updated, and then we can access it with this function here. So if we Control B again here and print it out, we can see that the grades average for this student here is 7.6. So like this is like how we can access the private members or like the private attributes of classes when we have created our objects with different or like multiple types of constructors. So another example here is that we can have like this student2 here, and we can update the ID for the student. So before we update the ID, we just print it out before, and then we can set the new ID here for the student with this function here that we created. And it will just update the attribute of that class and like for this object here, and we just set the ID here to 0 in this case, and we print it out again. So we can see if we run the program again, like before the ID was 3122, and then we updated the ID to 0, and then we can see that it has now updated the attribute and the ID is now 0 for that for this student2 object here. So I'll just comment this out again. We can also like have pointers to objects, like we've talked about a lot about pointers when we talk about structs, and also like smart pointers, where you can use these pointers that is pointing to like the objects in the memory. So like we create a new object here with a pointer. So we have a new name here, just Jim, and then we have like this. We create a unique pointer of the student class here, and then we give it a name or pointer, and we just call it like student3 pointer. And that pointer we want to point to an object of this student class here, and we pass the three parameters again to our constructor. So we'll use the second constructor here where we pass the name, the ID, and the age of the student. And then when we are creating pointers to objects in C++, we need to use the arrow operator instead of the dot operator. So where like if we don't have pointers, we can just access the public methods and attributes by this dot operator. But when we have pointers pointing to the objects and we create like pointers to their classes, then we need to use this arrow operator here to access the member variables and member like functions methods for that class. So if we print this out here, we can see that the ID from the pointer here is this, and then we can like access all the other different kind of functions again with the arrow operator here. So like this is what you like to give you an introduction to like how we can use classes and what it can be used for, and also like to show you some different kind of examples of like how we can create objects and access the public methods and also like attributes for an object that we have created. So thank you guys for watching this video, and remember to hit the subscribe button and bell notification on the video. And also like this video if you like content and you want more of it in the future. If you're interested in like doing something with this you learn in this C++ tutorial, I'm also doing a computer vision tutorial with OpenCV and an algorithm data structure tutorial, and both of them are in C++. So if you want to use some of the things you learn here in this tutorial for some more like practical stuff, like you can go check one of those tutorials up. I'll link to one of them up here, or else I'll just see you next video, guys. Bye for now.